Welcome to another episode of Straight Up Chicago Investor Podcast. I'm your guest, Zeke McDonald-Lewis, and with me, as always, is your host, Tom and Mark.
I'll take it, man. He forced it. Like that was
not his natural.
That was definitely not his comfort zone.
For those who are about to listen, this is very, very quiet spoken, in my opinion.
Like even in like the middle of that, it was like you hear like his like I don't know, his throat coming out his mouth. Like it was good.
Well done, sir. Well done. So,
dude, we talked about before a little man. Like
you just call me little man?
A little before. We were talking about it a little before, but Jobo died, or Eddie
Jobo from Eddie and Jobo died.
Yeah, man. And I was thinking about this. I saw it yesterday. He was 70 years old. So
that made me feel old.
Yes. So think about this though. 30 years ago, when I was trying to get into their spring break cruises and be the fifth caller and all that stuff, they were our age. Which makes me think like, shit, I only got 30 more years. Which only totally makes me like today I've done a whole bunch more stuff that I normally would have done. I cut through a bunch of bullshit just to like realize like you get these different moments in life where you realize like life is just way too short. And Jobo kind of helped me recognize that today.
I'm trying not to laugh, but that is funny that it took Jobo from Eddie and Jobo
well,
to make me realize.
Anybody that's over 35 years old knows who Eddie and Jobo were.
I would say most of our listeners didn't tune in to hear this, nor do half of them know who Jobo is.
Yeah, but yeah, they had
but I hear you. I'm with you.
They had their own Jobo somewhere in their life, and they'll die someday and they'll realize what we're talking about.
One day this will come back to you, kid.
Yeah.
Right now, Lance has no clue what's going on. No clue whatsoever.
Lance doesn't even know what B96 is.
No, way before his time.
He thinks it's a breed of a species.
So we'll link to it in the show notes. All right, so sensitive topic today, right? Like, and it's one that you do everything in the front end not to go through. And I think one of the things, and we reiterate a few times, is this is not. Sometimes it makes sense to go guns a-blazing, but man, most times than not, like get to a settlement, move on with your life. Like it's not about being right; it's about moving on. And all right, let's go get the next thing here.
I have another business owner friend that he always has a saying: "I'd rather be rich than be right," and that applies here. Of like, I said in the episode, we talked to other landlords that principle and justice usually doesn't work out in the eviction process here. So you just got to do what makes most sense for your business, and ultimately, it usually comes out to be a math problem of. If I get this person out sooner, then that means I can get back running my business, having my income come in from my rental property.
Yeah, and even before that, just understanding intent as well, right? If someone has hard times, but they're going to agree to some sort of payment plan or something, like usually there's something you can do there. Or if not, then it's like, hey, here's some money, go start over, and let's both move on. Like there's usually answers here where we don't have to get down this path. This path is for the times when someone's going to dig their heels in and be like, all right, I'm being forced down this path. I've tried all other options and we're not getting there. But even like in deals too, you see it. And I forgot if it was in the Kaiser episode or Smiles over one of them talking about people getting upset over disproportional things that kill like a $10 million deal, right? Like you just swallow your pride and just move, what makes the most sense here and let's move on. So
business decisions.
Yep. All right. What's our housing provider tip of the week?
All right, our housing provider tip of the week is going to be along the same line. So we talked about the legal process here of having to get rid of a tenant, and we talked also about communicating, and we talked a little bit about payment plans. So if you're going to do a payment plan, where I see a lot of owners fail is they're like, the tenant will be like, okay, I'll agree, and I'll pay you half of it 3 weeks from now. That doesn't work because 3 weeks from now, they don't show up with that money. You're in the same position. So if you're going to set up a payment plan with tenants, please make sure you set it up where maybe it's a little today. It might be $500 today and then a little a week from now. And now they might not get paid for another 2 weeks, but they could go borrow that $500 from someone else to pay you to pay them back 2 weeks from now. So keep in mind when you have these payment plans, make sure they're realistic. And I also see people, they put these payment plans together, but it never is structured where you actually have a chance to catch up. They might be down behind $2,000, but their next 3 payment plans only catch them about $1,000. And now the next month's rent hits, and now you're even in the rears even more. So make sure you have a fairly responsible, aggressive payment plan that makes them bring something to the table. If anything, how we word it is, hey, out of good faith, we'll work with you here, but we're going to require you to put at least $350, $500, whatever number it is, down today to start this payment plan to get us to agree to the entire process.
Yep, good stuff. All right. Bring in our guest.
All right. Today's guest, this topic, like I said, we like to talk about this on a regular basis. The legal process is something that all of us real estate investors don't like to think about when we don't have to, but it's something that has to be front and center. And we're going to go through that from start to finish today. And without further ado, welcome Zeke.
Thank you for having me.
Man, I'm excited. I saw you out at, I know you guys have known each other for a long time, and you and me just met each other for the most part at John Warren's event last month.
Yeah, no, I've been doing quite a bit with John Warren, and I'm actually looking at starting to do some investing myself potentially. And so John's been a great contact for that. The more you get into this world, the more you realize how much other people know that you can learn from. So,
as an eviction attorney, going to invest yourself, what's like one thing that you do that you're like, these guys never do this, I'm going to do because I know what I'm doing on this end?
Yeah, so I do think that like the legal perspective is that you have to do everything exactly right, exactly by the book. And then I talk to all these property managers or real estate investors that are successful, and they just get the job done whatever the most efficient way is. And so kind of going from doing things the perfectly legally correct way and getting things done as efficiently as possible is kind of, I don't know, giving me a new perspective on just how to deal with things more practically. And I think that's what most successful investors kind of tend to do.
I was talking to a 19-year-old the other day, and the word scrappy just came up. I'm like, you just got to be, there's a level of scrappiness.
I think that's a good word. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I know because you've done the evictions for Jeff at Drexel.
Mm-hmm.
So we've interacted there, and Chance, who does like my transactions, there's been multiple times that attorneys have said, "Okay, you can do that as your attorney. I'm telling you, don't do that." I understand what's happening here, but
Right.
feedback will give my partner Brian always the disclaimer, like, it's fine if you're going to do something like that, just don't tell me about it.
Yeah, that kind of thing can come up, but usually it's, people get into investing because they want to have a rental property and to build equity or something like that, and they're not thinking about evictions or mitigating losses. That's just something that they want to try and avoid, and I think that's absolutely the right approach to take until you're in a situation with a bad tenant that it's going to keep costing you money and you can't just avoid that problem. And at that point, you should start the process right away, so that if it is going to be long and painful and expensive, you get the clock rolling on it rather than wait and hope it goes away just to find out that you have to start that path after wasting a couple months of lost income.
Yeah, I wanted to have you on here because I think we talk about this topic a couple times a year, and I think it's important to stay front and center because there's a lot of people that get into this thinking either A, it's never going to happen to me, I'll never have to evict anyone, or B, I'll figure it out when I get there.
Yeah.
And the figuring out when I get there is very painful because they do just what you said. They wait 3 months to go deliver the 5-day, realizing that they delivered the wrong 5-day, all these things. So I like to keep this process front and center. And then if anything, it just reiterates my biggest speaking topic, which is around tenant screening at the end of the day to prevent having to call you up. So
absolutely. That's something that I promote all the time. And Tom probably knows this better than I do, but a lot of people, they are, buying their in contract to purchase a place, and they think, oh, here's the rent rolls, everybody's paying, everything looks good. And then you find out everyone's not paying. It's not fair. What do I do? Go after the seller after you buy it? No, you just have to deal with it. And, I think if you end up having that problem right after you buy a property and it's not quite as running as smoothly as you think it's going to be, that you address it right away.
Yep. So let's talk through the process. Let's do a quick recap here. I guess before that, though, let's give the preface that most tenants are good people. Most tenants intend to pay. We are talking about that small subsection here. I don't want this to come off as like someone's 3 days late and you got to go slap them around. Like, right? Like most people here are, trying to do the right thing. You are going to run into, just like in anything in life, there's 5%, 10%, whatever, the small handful that they're going to be problems for you. If you're teaching a classroom, there's going to be the problem child. Like that's what we are focusing on right now. We're not making a blanket statement here.
Oh, absolutely. And I think I'm biased too, because I only deal with the people that are willing to go the distance through the eviction process. But the vast majority of tenants will work something out with the landlord, and you don't need an attorney or an eviction or anything like that. So
correct. Like, I guess that's the point I want to make from just being a good person perspective and the business perspective, that most times you can work this out, right? Like, there's very few times where it's like, all right, there's no other, evictions suck for everybody. It's the last choice for everybody. And sometimes you got to go down that route though.
I'll add one thing to that is it does require effort. Sometimes you're going to have, the tenants are between the perfect paying ones and the ones we're going to talk about here today. There ends up being this level of communication. What's going on in your life? your car broke down. Okay, that's fine. You're going to get paid next week. Confirm that. Touch base with me too. Like the level of communication then is up then versus they just sit there and wait and hope they do pay. And that's one thing I always like to put out there to newer investors of like, these problems, don't go bury your head in the sand and at least communicate along the way. That way, at least you're better prepared to make the decision to call someone up.
Absolutely. And I think that's when you have a property manager that does make that effort and does that communication, they're able to keep a relationship with tenants that aren't always consistent and bring them back up, get payment plans, work it out. But really, most evictions only happen after there's a breakdown in communication and the tenant just stops responding.
That's a good point because we're more likely to be more aggressive on the, whether it be the legal side of things, if they just start ghosting us.
Yeah.
If they're answering the phone and telling me to do this and maybe they paid a little and they agree, maybe they sign a payment plan, like that's a huge indicator for, is this going to work out or not when you can't even get a hold of them to get you back, or they just blow off your text, or we like send a video text now. And if you don't respond to a video text, like you're not responding to anything.
I like your little trick too. Like when you call, let's say they owe you $4,000, and you call and say, "Hey, we're calling about that $7,000 you owe," and they call back and say, "No, it's only 4," but they get them back on the phone. So
that's one of those things BBEC says, like, don't tell me you're doing that.
Yeah, I didn't hear that.
All right, let's go through here. Like let's create the scenario. We're at a point where you've lost communication.
Yeah.
Right. Like you've tried reaching out, they're not responding. You've knocked on doors, like they're just not responding. Something has happened, and they're digging their heels in. They're not making payments. Walk us through like what should I be doing as a new housing provider who has not gone through this process before?
Yeah. So if you're a new housing provider and you haven't given notices before, I would talk to someone who does know what they're doing, or an attorney, just to make sure you're doing it right. Because the first thing I do when I talk to someone is say, give me the notices that you served, right? And with a lot of newer people that haven't done it before, they did something wrong. They posted it, they gave the wrong notice. There's some issue with it that I say, you got to redo it, right? And that's not a big deal for 5-day notices for non-payment of rent, which is 98% of evictions. But you're giving a 120-day notice to non-renew in Chicago and you didn't do it right and you've waited 3 or 4 months. Now you're in an uncomfortable position of trying to go forward on an eviction that has a flaw with it, or waiting another 3 or 4 months.
Yep. So is there anywhere that someone can find these forms, or is it, hey, you got to talk to an attorney?
Yeah, I mean, you can just Google Illinois Supreme Court approved 5-day or notice of non-renewal, and you should get a basic template that has instructions on it.
That sounded painful for you to say, like
painful?
In the sense of like pointing people in that direction.
No, not at all.
No, because I always tell people, listen, if you should have, anyone that has a rental property should have a guy like yourself or somebody that they can call and get this legal advice from. Because I always tell people, they're like, oh, you can send me over a form. It's like, I send you over my form, but man, if you go say that to your attorney and maybe it's a little different, you guys, to me, it seems like each law firm has a little tweak of difference of preference or whatever. But I always say, go right to whoever. If this does keep going, get that guy lined up right now.
Yeah.
That way, let him give you the instruction. If it costs you a couple of bucks, that way at least you're good to go and you're not wasting weeks.
That's true. If it's a totally new client that has never done any kind of eviction stuff before, or they're not local, I'll put my salesman hat on and say, we'll take care of everything. We'll do our own notices with, attorney letterhead for whatever that's worth, and we'll serve them. But realistically, if you're a local property manager and you live near the unit, or it's not, not an issue for you to serve a notice, it's going to be faster and cheaper for you to do it rather than hiring an attorney to fill out a form that you could fill out and, hiring a process server to go serve it when you could serve it. So, it can be kind of a headache for us to try and get access to a building that we don't own. So
I don't want to overshoot that because you give them the form, they fill it out, and you approve how it's filled out. Because you can still screw that part up, the filling it out.
It's hard to screw that part up.
I see people come on. I know you see this too. I know you're being you're nice.
Here, but there's some, let's talk about this. Like, who do you list on there, right? The people on the lease plus all other occupants, right?
Yeah, unknown occupants.
All unknown occupants.
So you could have just messed it up right there.
See?
I think that's unlikely to be a major issue. But yeah, as long as you have the amount. So normally we're talking about a 5-day notice.
Yes.
For a 5-day notice, as long as you have the correct amount owed on there, the names of the tenants that are on the lease. I mean, yes, unknown occupants is potentially problematic, but if what I see more often is they get the address wrong, the address of the property, or
The
there's
unit number, right? Like 2N versus 2S.
yeah, that's problematic. Or if there's 2 or 3 people listed on the lease, but they only put one person's name on the notice, that's not great. So maybe look at your lease before you fill out the notice and see who the tenants are. And
But the amount owed, does that include late fees? Does that include past maybe chargebacks for maintenance? Like that's where I see people always like, oh man, I have a late fee that doesn't even fall in with the actual ordinance. That's
so
wrong in itself.
in practice, that number is not actually as important because after you serve the 5-day notice, if you're going through the eviction process, it's going to be at least 5 months or so before you get a judgment. And at that point, there's going to be a totally new number for all the new back rent, late fees, whatever. And judges don't generally look back and say, was this number correct when you first filled it out? They say, well, there's always room, there's always like some change or some differences. As long as it's not grossly wrong, it should be fine.
So can something get thrown out? That I know I'm fast forwarding here in the process. Can something get thrown off because the number's wrong, or maybe you included
If the number
a few?
was too high, maybe. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you say, it's $5,000 you put on your 5-day notice and it was actually only 2, you can say, well, maybe it was reasonable for the tenant to make the argument that they didn't pay because the number was wrong. And realistically, the vast majority of evictions don't make it to the point where you're sitting in front of a judge and arguing about the situation. And that's what all tenants and landlords assume when they haven't done it before. They assume they're going to get their day in court. They're going to be able to vindicate themselves. And that just doesn't happen almost ever.
Yep.
It's very clinical. It's did you serve the notice? Yes.
All right. So they eventually they get the form, whether it be from someone like you. We gave a link there that we could put in the show notes. They get that filled out. Now they got to go deliver it. They have to hand deliver it here in Cook County in the state of Illinois. I think across the board you have to hand deliver it, or at least to anyone over the age of 13.
Yeah.
And you kind of have 2 options. You could hand deliver it yourself, or you could hire a process server. Correct? Is that kind of your couple options?
I would say, yeah. For personal service, yes. The biggest misconception is that you can post it. I don't know why people think that you can post it on the door. That's very commonly an option in other places, but not in Illinois. The other thing that is worth considering is sending it by certified mail. That is a fallback option. And I say it's a fallback because technically, legally, you're supposed to get that green postcard signed by the tenant and returned to you. That never happens. In practice, most judges will accept that USPS tracking that shows delivered to an individual on this day, right? But we would much prefer to go forward with personal or substitute service when you're actually handing it to someone living in the unit.
I'm a big fan of having a process server deliver it for dollars. So it's so hard. People, they have cameras out front. They don't open the door. They're expecting it like for $85, and they usually video it, and it's usually halfway entertaining.
85,
$85, $95. That's typically what do you like,
75, 80. That's
all right.
yes,
Then we need a new guy.
it's-
Either way, I found value at 85, so that's a steal at
Sure,
75.
yeah.
But then it just gets done, and they usually they harass. That's their entire job is to bust people's chops, and that's what I like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't have any problem with process servers. It's just if you're local, 75, $80. Yeah, it's a reasonable service.
Agree. If you live on the block and stuff like that,
Yeah.
you could probably just sit in your living room and wait for them to walk outside. But yeah, when you're all around Chicago, we try to be efficient about it.
Absolutely.
All right. So we serve the 5-day. What happens next?
I would start talking to an attorney right away after you serve a 5-day. First, to make sure that you've done it right and that you don't have to redo it, but also so that you get all your ducks in a line. So on that 6th day after the notice is expired and they haven't paid, you can get the eviction filed and started rather than spending a few days getting together whatever you need for the attorney or whatever you need to prepare. You can prepare in advance so that you can get it filed right away and start the process.
5 days. This is the question. Is it business days? Is it calendar days? Is it how?
Yeah.
Fall on a Sunday is different.
I would defer to your attorney.
Okay.
But it's business days. If it ends on a Sunday, then it would go to Monday, and it's not until after the 5th day. So on the 6th day, you can file. unless there's a holiday or a weekend in there. I mean, you don't have to file it on the 6th day. In the grand scheme of things, it's not going to make a huge difference. My general point is just you don't want to sit on it too long.
Can you get in trouble for filing too early? Like say
Yeah.
you missed.
Well, you wouldn't get in trouble, right? But say you serve the 5-day today, and 4 or 5 days later you file it, not waiting for the 6th day. You wait 4 or 5 months in the eviction process just for a judge to say, "Oh, hey, you filed the eviction too soon, dismissed,"
Yeah.
and then you have to refile the eviction after wasting months of time. So it's just not worth the risk.
So better be 2 days late than or after to be safe than to be on time and potentially risk being a day or two early.
Absolutely, yeah,
Or just count.
yeah.
All right. One question while this is going on. Let's say you file, right? Like we're at this point in the game. There's going to be this like months of time passing. Tenant owed $4,000. They make $1,000 payment. What happens?
So this is something I tell everybody at the onset when they first contact me, and should have been a disclaimer probably at the beginning. You cannot accept a single dollar from your tenants after you've served a notice. And I didn't say 5-day notice because it's a little bit more nuanced than that. If you serve a 5-day notice, you can't take any money from them. Now, within 5 days, they can certainly pay the entire amount that they owe. That's totally reasonable. They can cure the 5-day notice. That doesn't usually happen. If the 5-day notice says they owe $1,000 and they want to pay $500, you can't take that money. Otherwise, it invalidates the 5-day notice.
Well, just to simplify, like you can take the money if you think you're going to work out with them, right? You can't have it both ways. You can either work out with them or go down
Yes.
the eviction process.
Or if you
Absolutely.
just start over then. So in
Yes.
the case of a $4,000, if someone shows up at $2,000, most of the time we'll take it and we'll just turn around and hand them the next 5-day notice. Then at that point,
yeah, usually
Sure.
if someone's doing that, they're working with you. You should.
yeah,
I mean, just business advice, like you should work with that person.
of course, yeah.
Absolutely. That's totally fine. But the problem is you get a landlord that, 2 months into the process, you file the eviction and they make $1,000, the tenant makes $1,000 payment. They say, "Oh, great. We haven't been making any money. Of course we want this income."
Yeah, I
Well,
see.
now, now you've thrown a wrench in things, right? So realistically, tenants do that, especially the tenants that maybe have been down this road several times before. They'll just start making payments and see if you mess up and hold it for too long or accept it. And you kind of have to make sure that you're careful about rejecting all the payments, saying in writing to the tenant, "I'm not accepting any payments." You got to talk to the lawyer. Absolutely, you want to settle evictions, you want to work it out. But the only way that can happen is if the tenant signs an agreement.
Okay. All right. So on the 6th day you file, what happens? Walk us through the process. Next step.
Yep. So you file an eviction, you get a court date probably about 6 weeks out. And I'm speaking mostly about Chicago. Obviously, you go out, in other places in Cook County, there's 6 districts, and it gets a little bit different. But generally speaking, you get a court date that's six weeks out. Now you have to serve the tenants with a summons and complaint. So given the law change at the beginning of the year, you don't need to use the sheriff anymore. You can go straight to a process server, which is definitely a boon for plaintiff landlords. And so you give it to your go-to process server, and hopefully they serve it. If they serve it and you have service before your first court date, great. Then you're just waiting on, if the tenant shows up, they get to go to ERP, and if they don't show up, then you can set it for a default prove-up, meaning you can get your order of possession and money judgment without them being in court. But before we talk about ERP or what happens when the tenant shows up, I'd say a lot of the time, if you can't get service because they're refusing to open the door, you can either get more time to make more attempts, or you can do what's called service by posting, where you say, "Okay, we tried to serve them, we made at least 3 or 4 attempts, and we couldn't do it. So now you pay for the sheriff to do posting," which they don't actually post it to the door. They just put it in some periodical and I think mail it. And the point is you have service so you can continue your eviction. But if you get service by posting, you cannot get a money judgment against the tenant.
Yep. All right. ERP, let's talk about it. So our listeners heard that and go, what's that?
Yeah. ERP is the early resolution program. It was kind of birthed out of the COVID moratorium and evictions, and it's supposed to be a 28-day delay or continuance for tenants to get free legal help and to potentially work things out with the landlord. In practice, if there's rental assistance available, ERP can be great at helping tenants get rental assistance, but otherwise it's basically just a 28-day delay in the process if the tenants appear. So
Have you seen it been benefit? Have you gone through the process where a tenant goes through this and then they come to agreement with the housing provider? Like, have you seen success stories out of this, or no? Pretty much just they get assistance or not.
Personally, if the tenant's willing to communicate with me, you can make an agreement with them without the ERP program. The ERP program doesn't really help them to settle anything. Where ERP is useful is in getting rental assistance. So rental assistance comes and goes. There's kind of waves of it. Sometimes it's all dried up and there's nothing left. Sometimes there's new funding and you can get it. And if there is new funding, ERP will push tenants to apply for rental assistance. And if it's available, that's great, because a lot of times, if there's a back balance of $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, getting that rental assistance is usually worth more to the landlord housing provider than just continuing on with the eviction.
Now, just go back to that timeline there. So you file, you're out 6 weeks.
Yep.
And then 6 weeks, you pretty much automatically get a 30-day continuance to go through this part of it. Is that
So-
how that?
6 weeks out from filing, hopefully you've served the summons and complaint. That's ideal. Assuming you've done that, now the tenant shows up, you get 28 days for ERP, which is supposed to be 28 days. Now it's more, but that number fluctuates. So you're out another month. You show up again, tenant's there, you get moved to a contested courtroom. So what that means is you don't know your next court date, but once you're assigned to a new courtroom, you'll get it. So then 3 weeks out from that, you're in a contested courtroom and you set a trial date. A lot of these things can fluctuate. It really depends on what the tenant does. So if the tenant shows up and or the tenant hires an attorney to represent them and they file a jury demand, that will extend the process. If the tenant is not showing up or they're willing to agree to some kind of settlement, that'll make the process a lot faster. So trying to make communication with the tenant is the best thing you can do in an eviction process, because even if they weren't talking to you before, if you can offer them something, whether that's relief on the back rent that they owe or sealing the eviction so that it's easier for them to find a new place to go to, or something else that you might not know unless they tell you and it's something you can help them with. All of those things if you can offer them something that they want to resolve the eviction faster, absolutely that's the best way to resolve an eviction.
When we were at John Warren's meetup, you alerted me to an alarming statistic around sealing the eviction.
Yeah.
First, if anything, you explain what that is, and then secondly, explain how much that's happening, I guess.
Yeah, so the rules on it have changed, but in general, there's always kind of been the option of saying, we'll agree to seal an eviction, right? Whether the tenant moves out on their own voluntarily and then they just want it sealed, or whether the parties agree to a pay and stay agreement, or that the tenant's going to vacate or anything like that. Most of the time, that will include a sealing component. Sealing just means it's not expungement, but the public record of the eviction gets hidden so that no one can access it. Now, there's some really expensive software that you could track. You might be able to find that eviction filing from the past, but for all intents and purposes, once the eviction's sealed, all of you new landlords that are screening people, when you search this tenant, you're not going to find it. It'll be as if it never happened.
That's crazy. That blows my mind.
Yeah.
What percentage did you say? I think you told me this. I forgot what it was.
Oh, I wish
Give
I
me a
knew
rough
what
estimate.
I said, but well, it's hard because the most
You don't know because they don't exist.
Yeah, right. Well, that's a good point too.
What do you think? Is it like half the time you think it's happening?
So I'm not sure exactly what the percentage would be of cases that the tenant just doesn't show up and they're defaulted versus there's actually some kind of resolution. But of the cases where there's some kind of resolution, whether it's settled or they agree to leave or something happens and the tenant does something proactive, I would say a very high percentage of those get sealed, maybe 85%, something like that. Meaning the next time they're applying for a unit, there is not going to be a record of that eviction floating around. And so the next landlord won't know that they were just removed.
So if you went to the Cook County, wherever that link is, and there, you could look up their name, like they wouldn't have existed there either. You're saying, with
Well, I mean, if they have other tickets or
yeah,
other
but
issues,
for
yeah,
that specific case,
right.
like that just
And,
is like
and we're talking about the Cook County electronic docket.
yes,
right?
that's
You
what I was
just
looking
like search to see what kind. Yeah, normally if there's an unsealed eviction, that's where you'd find it. But once the eviction is sealed, that record is no longer accessible.
So listeners, when someone's been living on their couch for the last 23 on their friend's couch for the last 36 months, that's a red flag.
Yeah, also due diligence yourself. Like, look up the address, validate it with the credit bureau, with forewarn, all the different ways. Look
Yeah.
up who owns that building.
Yeah.
If it's a bigger company, because it's a courtyard building, drive by, get the management sign. Like, there's a lot you can do on your own to really find out the whole story. Like,
Yeah.
you cannot use this as an excuse. Like, you need to go do your due diligence.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more because I mean that's even further than I normally recommend. I normally recommend that people just search the name on the electronic docket because oftentimes you'll find that there is an outstanding eviction against a tenant that you have that's not paying rent. It's just very common.
Yep. One of the things I didn't realize as well is the back judgment. So you can actually have a judgment for the $8,000 they owe or whatever, go after them, probably never get that money, but dropping that usually makes this go a lot smoother. Is that accurate? Like, is that money
Yeah.
you ever would get anyways? Like, in my head, I'm always just like, all right, let's move on with our lives. Like, you
Yeah.
go this way, I go this way. Like, it's kind of like my mindset on it.
There are unique circumstances where you have a tenant that has really good income or assets and you know about it, or they have a guarantee on the lease, their parent or somebody who is, collectible is a word we use for someone who has enough money that it might be worth going after them. And we see that a lot more in commercial leases where there's some kind of personal guarantee, but that's the exception. The majority of cases, that money judgment isn't going to be worth anything because you're not going to spend an extra $2,000 on a lawyer to go after them just to find out that they don't have enough money for you to get anything or garnish anything from them.
Yeah, they probably would have paid you. They probably would have worked out with you if they had money.
Exactly. So in the majority of evictions that are settled in that way, where you say, okay, you'll agree to leave before we can get the sheriff out there, we'll drop the back rent that you owe. That's a very common way to settle eviction cases.
Okay. All right. So front to end now, where are we at timeline wise?
So, like I said, it really depends on what the tenant does. In general, I say you should expect about 5 to 8 months, depending on all kinds of factors. But
because tenants aren't showing up to court all the time too. How does that affect the process?
yeah, so if a tenant doesn't show up to court, then you can set the matter for default prove up, which basically just means you'll get your eviction order that you can take to the sheriff as long as the tenant doesn't come to court. And a lot of tenants don't want to come to court because they don't know what to expect and they know that they're not paying and they just avoid the situation, right? And so a lot of cases get resolved by default prove up. They don't show up, you get an order.
Is there a game they'll play though too where they could call it back to court? If they don't show up to court, they could call it back?
I'm reluctant to even talk about it in a recorded way because I don't want tenants to know how easy it is. But realistically, I think a lot more landlords listen to this podcast than tenants. So yes, whether you get a default prove up or they fail to comply with an agreement or you have a bench trial, whatever happens, you have an eviction order and you take that eviction order to the sheriff and say, please enforce it. Now, the sheriff's going to take 4 to 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the season and how busy they are. And in that 4 to 6 to 8 weeks that you're waiting on the sheriff to enforce it, the tenant can file a motion, any motion. Theoretically, it's supposed to be a motion to vacate the eviction order, but If they file a motion that says, I don't really want to leave, the eviction's off. The sheriff won't enforce it. And you'll go back to court on that motion. And if they filed it within enough time, within 30 days of a default order being entered, the judge will just vacate that default judgment and you'll continue the eviction process. If it wasn't defaulted, then the judge will just deny their motion and you can send it back to the sheriff, but now you're waiting on the sheriff again. So
You go back to the bottom of the pile, I bet.
it depends. No, actually, sometimes if the sheriff have already made an attempt and failed to enforce it for some reason, once you resubmit it to them, they usually act on it much faster. But that's no real guarantee there.
Yep.
It's not in writing.
No.
So walk me through, like, you're going through this, you get the actual court date, you come to settlement with the tenant. Like, hey, instead of waiting this 8 weeks, if you're out by next Saturday, we're not going to go after the back rent and blah, blah, blah. You come to whatever agreement that is.
Yep.
They break that agreement, right? They're supposed to be out.
There's an important note that I think I have to add here. It's not just the agreement. It's that the agreement is entered by a judge. Because at any point you could have the most formal legal agreement with a tenant that they're gonna, you're gonna give them cash for keys, or they're gonna pay, or whatever it is that you want to do, before an eviction or during an eviction, and that won't have any meaning whatsoever. It won't be enforceable to you at all. The only way it's going to be enforceable is if they sign that agreement and a judge enters it on a court date. So on a court date, if you say, here's our signed agreement, these are the terms, and a judge says, okay, tenant, do you understand it? Or if the tenant's not there, they'll take your word for it, and they enter it as a matter of record in the court case. Once they've done that, then when the tenant fails to follow through, they didn't pay when they were supposed to, they didn't move out, they didn't do whatever they were supposed to do, the judge will say, the agreement's clear, here's your eviction order, right? But anything short of that signed, entered agreement is not enforceable.
Yeah. So you come to an agreement, payment plan, whatever it may be, get out by this day, like, let's move on. Whatever that is, it needs to be, the judge needs to put it in the system. Otherwise, it does you no good.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So if you're trying to do this yourself, like, that's something I didn't know. That's something I would definitely miss. So what have you seen go wrong in these scenarios? From, like, how you've heard, like, horror stories of people having 15-month evictions, 18-month evictions. Like, what were you didn't do X, Y, Z. That's why it's triple the time length as someone else.
Yeah. So I would say that's maybe more on your attorney than you. If it's going 15, 18 months, something like that shouldn't happen in a residential eviction unless you've done something wrong. So if you took money from the tenant and accepted it without an agreement, that is a good way to get your case dismissed. If you want to try and file the eviction yourself without an attorney, and then you find out 4 months down the road that it was a bad idea, that's a situation where your case will get dismissed and you'll have to restart. Otherwise, they shouldn't be lasting that long. Like, if the tenant is doing everything in their power to delay the process, they're not answering the door, they're filing motions to vacate, they hire an attorney, file a jury demand, they can extend that process, but not indefinitely, not more than 8 or 9 months unless there's some other unforeseen issue.
Got it. All right. And then, somewhat related question. Let's say a tenant, they're going to get in front of court and be like, well, he didn't, my cabinets don't work, my whatever, like, right? And most of the times it's just desperation. But let's say they have a legit, because just like there's crappy tenants, there are crappy housing providers. There are guys who don't do what they're supposed to do. Let's say they have a legitimate beef. Does any of that matter now, or is it just black and white? Hey, you have not paid.
It does. That's where it starts to get a little bit more nuanced. And if you anticipate that there are going to be problems because maybe property manager wasn't addressing things, or there's something more complicated that the tenant has a legitimate claim, that would be a situation where you might consider filing a possession-only eviction. Because if you're not going after the money, that limits the scope of what the eviction is about. You're doing possession only, the judge is saying, who actually has a right to this property? whether there were defects or other issues, they're going to be less concerned about that because that's not the issue. The issue is only whether or not they have possession or whether or not whoever's more entitled to possession. But by and large, those issues, even if there's maybe a real dispute about them, aren't a good reason to do anything other than continue with the eviction as normal, because the judges do see these every day. And that is the most, of the cases that go to trial, the tenants that want to show up and fight, they will make those same arguments. There are problems with the unit. I didn't pay rent for the last year because the toilet didn't work very well, or the refrigerator, I asked for a new one and they didn't give me, whatever it is. And those are generally not a bar to an eviction.
Okay. So I guess point for the housing provider there is just document everything, right? Just in case you get into that situation, in case you have like a lenient judge who will take that into consideration, document everything.
And there is an element of experience that comes into this, because knowing which judge you're going to be in front of would make a difference depending on what the circumstances are. If there are really outstanding circumstances like that, those types of cases are also good ones to settle. I mean, most of the time you're willing to give up pretty much everything to get the tenant out anyway. So if they really have problems, then you can offer them the same deal that you're offering everyone else.
Yeah.
Giving up a lot of the rent or sealing the case, whatever else.
Got it. Makes sense.
I feel a large percentage of ours ends up being just possession. We just want possession. What overall, what do you see in the practice as far as are people really going after the money? I know there's sometimes they have it, but what would you say?
Not usually. I think most of the time the money that's owed is a bargaining chip. It's, yes, you owe that money. Yes, we could come after you. There's a threat of it affecting your credit in the future. There's a threat of it being a consequence for you. And so as a bargaining chip, we can agree to get rid of it if you work with us and sign an agreement and don't force us to go through this process and make the sheriff remove you. So most of the time you're not saying, oh yeah, that $7,000, I'm gonna get it from their wages. That's just usually not realistic, but it is still worth going after it rather than just filing a possession only eviction, so that you can use it as a bargaining chip to try and get the case resolved.
Yep. How many times do you think you end up settling in some form as opposed to going the whole distance? Like what percent, whether it's cash for keys or something at that day where it's like, all right, be out by this day, like what percent don't go the full distance?
Yeah, I would say just a rough estimate that maybe 10% or less actually make it to bench trial where you're arguing in front of a judge. And then the remaining, call it 90%, is pretty well split between defaults and settlements. But I would say it depends more on the landlord, the property manager, and the tenant. So I have landlords that have a specific kind of style, like how they manage their properties and what kind of units and tenants that they're managing. And so I'll have one landlord that 95% of their evictions are settled. They communicate well with the tenants, and that's just kind of how it works out for all of theirs. And then another landlord, maybe all of theirs get defaulted because none of the tenants show up, right? So I can't say in general this is what you can expect, because it really depends on the people involved.
Yep, makes sense.
I think for us, only about 10% ever make it to the actual sheriff that we do. We inherit so many different problems where we just want to negotiate out because we don't actually know everything that happened before we started working on it. So we always try to do everything we can to get them out sooner than later.
Yep. All right, give us some horror stories or funny stories. I mean, this is probably a normal day activity for you, but for our listeners, give us something funny, horror, but you've seen some things here.
So just a couple months ago is a real horror story that people who haven't done the eviction process before, they think, well, I am entitled to the money that is owed to me and they need to get out because they haven't paid. They don't realize how long the process is going to be, or how unfair it's going to be, or how much judges will kind of give every benefit of the doubt to tenants. And I recently had that on display. We had a fraud case, basically, where we would probably, we wouldn't call it a squatter, but basically someone used information on an application that wasn't theirs in order to get into it. So the person on the lease was not the person living there. So we evict the person on the lease and all unknown occupants. And the person living there doesn't really care about that because their name's not on anything. And they can draw out the process as long as they can. And at the end of it, we finally sign an agreement. You're going to move out before we get the sheriff to remove you. Great. Well, the tenant goes in and removes all the TVs off the walls, take the furniture out, basically loots the place. And the agreement said that as long as they left on time, the landlord would pay them $1,000. And we said, obviously, we're not going to do that because you have looted the entire apartment for thousands of dollars worth of TVs and furniture. So that doesn't really seem fair. You violated the agreement by doing that. Well, we brought it in front of a judge, and the tenant didn't appear in court because he was a fraudster, obviously. And the judge awarded the tenant $1,000. We had to pay him $1,000. No talk about the TVs and the furniture. It's just wasn't relevant, apparently. So, yeah, that stuff like that, I think that people just aren't prepared for. You think that you're going to be entitled to some kind of relief, and the reality is you just want to try and get that tenant out as fast as you possibly can and as cleanly as you possibly can.
So much of my conversations with other landlords is about justice to what you think is not going to exist here. Principle is not worth fighting for. It's like, this is just understand the rules, know how this works, try to get the best case scenario. Sometimes you're going to get screwed. Sometimes you're going to get a win. And that's the cost of doing business as a landlord here in Chicago. And ultimately 20 years from now, none of this will matter because you're going to be rich from investing in real estate.
Absolutely.
All right. You mentioned squatters. You buy a building, you buy a 6-unit, 20-unit building. You got a unit that's got a squatter in there, right? Like, girl was on the lease. She's gone. Boyfriend moved in. Him and his buddies are there now. They're not on the lease. They're in a unit. They're not paying. Do you go through the same process here? Or is there any different way to go about this quicker?
Yeah, not currently. I would say squatters are basically handled just like every other eviction. There isn't a more nuanced or a faster process like people would expect there to be. We're hoping that that's going to change. There's a policy change that goes into effect at the beginning of 2026 that might change things, but I wouldn't count on it. For all intents and purposes, you should treat a squatter exactly as you would a tenant that's not paying rent. But I would act more quickly on starting the eviction process rather than hoping you can work something out.
Yeah, there's no working out there. That's pure gloves on. Let's go.
I would say one other thing, not necessarily a squatter, but if you buy a foreclosure, there's supposed to be a process in place where you can enforce an order of possession from the foreclosure case. And if that doesn't work out, a lot of the time it will also just be better to start a normal eviction process rather than try and enforce the order of possession you get from the foreclosure case.
Okay. So then where's the line between trespassing and squatting? Right. Like, when can I call the cops and be like, dude, this guy's got to go?
Oh, you should call the cops every time, right? Because even in the very unlikely chance that something happens that, the cops interfere or the cops showing up is enough to get the squatter to leave, it was worth the effort, right?
Sometimes it just scares them.
Yeah. And I have this conversation with myself all the time. Personally, I'd like to think that if it's my own home and I live there and someone broke in, that if I called the cops, they'd show up and be like, oh yeah, this robber just broke into your house, I'll remove them. But with investment properties, the standard for the squatter occupant is very low, in that there's someone squatting there, you call the police show up. Most of the time, the squatters that do this will either have a phony lease, they'll change the utilities into their name, they'll do something to make it seem like they live there. Send mail to that address to their name, something, right? But even when they don't have any of that, if the police come and they say, I live here, that's usually enough for the police to say, we can't handle this, you have to deal with it on your own, it's a civil matter, file an eviction. Like I said, come 2026, hopefully that burden shifts a little bit on the squatter instead of on the landlord, but we'll see.
How was that saying when you used to fight with your sibling when a kid, like possessions 9/10 of the law or something like that? How they used to go?
What?
Yeah, that's a
If
common
you took
legal.
a toy from your sibling or whatever, like I got possession, like it's mine. It's possession is 9/10 of the law.
Yeah, absolutely, and that applies to squatters as well. If they're there, then they possess it unless or until you can prove otherwise, which in Chicago takes 8 months, 5 months. Takes time.
You're just a good sibling. You never fought with your siblings and your brothers and sisters. So
I just never used that line.
all right.
9/10 possession. I wasn't using fractions as a kid either. That was. So. All right, so we've covered a lot here. Do you see this process changing over the next 2 or 3 years? Or do you think it's going to be much of the same? Do you think it's going to get better, worse?
I think it'll continue to change. It changes every year. So every year or so, judges rotated out, and new judges kind of change the rules a little bit, but the changes are gradual. So there's not going to be any if I'm guessing, I don't think there's going to be any major changes. Just, I think ERP could evolve. I think timelines could change a little bit depending on, how judges handle things. But I don't expect it to change drastically anytime soon.
Got it. Anything else?
I got nothing else.
That was a lot. Man, we got one horror story. Can you give us one more? There's got to be, your head's got to have like 50 of them in there. They're entertaining.
Oh, man. No, the scariest thing are the squatter cases, really, because
Yeah, that's not like someone who came on financial hardship. That guy is ill intent.
Yeah, so that's
And you have no clue who they are.
Yeah,
or what they're
You're-
capable of.
Yeah.
Or
You have a tenant vacate and you decide you're going to sell a building. This may or may not be explicitly a true story that happened a month ago, but your realtor goes out there and you
just
have
gives
a
the
lockbox.
lockbox? No.
They're like, oh wow, there's no key in the lockbox. Well, there's someone with a mattress with no sheets living in there. Well, how can that possibly be? Because we just got the tenants out a week ago and it's up for sale. We're trying to show it to people. Why can't we sell it? Well, because there's someone living in there now, right? And all they have to do is draw out the eviction process for as long as possible, and they can continue to live there.
And they could call the police on you. I've had squatters call the police on me for badgering them.
Actually, I have one more good horse. It just came to me. I evicted a tenant, pretty standard eviction, non-payment of rent. And then a couple weeks later, someone called me and they wanted to evict the same guy. He was in the same neighborhood and he moved a couple houses down, found a new landlord. It was sealed, so the new landlord didn't even look. But so then I evicted him a second time from a new landlord. And then a couple months later, the tenant calls me and asks if I would represent him against his landlord, which obviously I did not do. But apparently he liked. Maybe that's bad representation on me that the tenant wanted to talk to me again. But,
so
yeah,
I'll give one more little tip. If you're buying a vacant building like we buy, so something that's in demo court, a lot of times that draws, squatters, bums, whatever. You can work with the city to make the claim it's inhabitable and have them shut it down. So we've had that happen before. Hey, there's no water, there's no gas, you got to go, right? If it's going to be some confrontational thing, like sometimes the city is your friend. Again, this is if the building is truly inhabitable. Like you have that card to play. It doesn't mean it's going to work out. But just know that you have that in the back.
Who
I
did
would
you call
be-
311 in that sense, in that situation?
We had a situation where it was in demo court, so we had an attorney from the city.
Gotcha.
And we're saying, hey, I don't want anyone to die in my property. Winter's coming. You guys got to get out here, do an inspection.
Gotcha.
Because they have the sticker on there saying this has to be inhabitable, blah, blah, blah. And then they actually enforced it.
the city is definitely capable of taking that kind of action and helping, but I would be hesitant to go that route unless, like you said, you were already in demolition court.
This is purely vacant building,
Right. If you're not already in front of the city on some kind of building issue that you're working with the city on to start with, and you try to get some help
You don't
from
want
the
to
city,
invite them into your house.
No.
Yes. But if you're buying something that you are gutting anyways, like that is a card you can play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, cool. Ready to wrap?
Ready to wrap?
Let's do it.
What's your competitive advantage? How have you been able to get so many landlords to the finish line while others wish they could?
I think just kind of being in the middle of eviction attorneys, right? There's eviction attorneys that only take an eviction because someone's paying them and it's a one-off thing, and they make mistakes and it takes a lot longer and they're not really qualified to be doing it. And then on the big guy end, there are a lot of great eviction attorneys that just have crazy volume, that's all they do, and they don't have the time to really work out settlement agreements and resolve cases faster than someone otherwise could. So I think I'm in the sweet spot of being able to really spend a little bit more time dealing with tenants and working out agreements and resolving cases, but still do enough of them to know what to expect from judges and what to do not to drop the ball or delay the process.
Yep. What is the one piece of advice you would tell someone that is yet to buy a property here in Chicago?
I've actually heard this on your podcast before, and it was really great advice, which is go to a meetup, talk to people. If you have, you probably are coming to the table with some kind of good experience, like whether you were a property manager or whether you have dealt with evictions or whether, you know something. Use other people to fill in the gaps. If you have a question about lending, talk to someone who knows a lot about lending, right? And that's, I think, what would be most helpful if you're just starting out is figure out what the gaps in your knowledge are and find people to fill them.
All right. What do you do for fun?
A lot of sports. Play rugby, Chicago Lawyers Rugby Club.
Really?
Plug them.
There's a Chicago Lawyers Rugby Club.
Yep.
That
And
sounds so aggressive.
mostly rugby.
I can't believe my lawyer's not a part of this. I got to talk to Chance. He's
Yeah.
a rugby
No,
guy.
if you want to join, it's a lot of fun. It's a very social group. But otherwise, started playing pickleball and volleyball, like old man sports. And yeah, audiobooks, stuff like that.
Cool. All right. What's a good book, podcast, or self-development activity you'd recommend to our listeners?
So I don't listen to anything educational.
So you listen to us.
I should. But Red Rising, great book if you're into fiction.
All right.
All right. Other than yourself, name a valuable resource for other Chicago real estate investors.
James Erwin Law Firm. If you want transactional real estate, if you're buying or selling, he is really the best at what he does. Especially if you're just getting into it and you need to make sure that things go right, he's great.
Yep. And we had him episode 330, and I think we had him on early as well, but I couldn't find that one.
We didn't have him on earlier. We had him on then with Kaiser, the anniversary party.
Oh, got it. Yeah, he was on for that. But yeah, episode 330, great guy. An NSBC guy. See him out there.
Well, he's been in Chicago for more than 30 years now. So anything that I have that comes up, I ask him all the questions, and he normally has a good answer for me.
Yep. All right, Zeke, thank you so much. You provide a ton of value to our listeners. How can they learn more about you? Is there any way they can provide value to you?
I mean, if you're wanting to learn more about an eviction or starting that process, Google me. Give me a call. I'll talk to you.
We'll put when we make him Google, we'll put your information in the show notes.
All right.
We'll just link to Google.
Yeah.
All right. Who are we playing for? We end with our Chicago fact. Let's see if we get this right. Who are we playing for? Who's sponsoring?
All right. Today's sponsor, Renova Financial, the Workman team, and we're playing for Paul D'Agostino. And Paul, thank you for buying a shirt on the merch store, which I just updated. There's some really cool stuff on there. I bought a whole bunch of gear myself. So, Paul, if myself or Zeke gets this question right, you get a $50 gift card brought to you by Renova Financial.
Also, listeners, if any of you are having a baby in the near future, let us know. We'll send you the onesie.
Yes.
We like sending those out. Those make us feel good.
Straight up Chicago onesie.
Yep. All right. So, Zeke, I might have been completely making this up, but I remember talking to you at one of the events, and you played beach volleyball. And you mentioned volleyball just in your answers there. So I got a beach question here. According to Chicago Park District, how many public beaches are there in Chicago? And your options are 8, 16, 26, 41.
Oh, that's horrible.
I have no idea what defines a public beach, like where it stops and
Well,
ends.
I'm going to try and defend myself. I'm a transplant. I'm from Wisconsin, but I would guess higher. 8 seems way too low. Even 6. I'll guess the big one, 41.
Now I'll say 16 then. But it might be 8.
No.
That's
It's gotta
probably
be
more than
than
8, yeah.
All right, so we're going with 41 and 16?
Yeah.
Guys, you split it. 26.
Oh.
Hovering.
That was a good trivia question.
Man, I couldn't name 8 of them, though. I probably could name 8 of them.
I think I can name 8. Growing up, I only knew Montrose. I was like, all right, man, I can't believe everyone comes to Chicago and goes to this beach. And back then, it
Honestly,
was also crappy.
If you
It's
only
nicer
know
now.
one, if you only know one beach, that's a good one to know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Paul, I'm sorry. Thank you again for buying something on the Straight Up merch store. But we will put your name back in, and you can qualify again for the Chicago Fact. Thank you to today's sponsor, Renovo Financial, the Workman team. And listeners, if we're working on 2026 sponsorships, so if you or someone you know thinks could make a good sponsor, obviously we have a very niche listenership here, which is basically Chicago real estate investors. So if you're interested in being a sponsor, reach out to us, straightupchicagoinvestor@gmail.com, or you could find us on Instagram. Thank you, Zeke. Thank you, Tom. And listeners, we'll see you next week.
Thanks all.